Mesoamerican chronology divides the history of pre-Columbian Mesoamerica into several periods: the Paleo-Indian, the Archaic, the Preclassic, Formative, the Classic, and the Postclassic. Some of the period divisions are taken from the history of the Maya. The Preclassic-Classic boundary marks the first Maya collapse, the Classic-Postclassic boundary marks the second, and the end date of 1697 marks the conquest of the last independent Maya city-state, Tayasal. However, this chronology applies to other pre-Columbian Mesoamerican civilizations as well. Overview: Paleo-Indian period, 10,000–3,500 BCE. The Paleo-Indian period or era is that which spans from the first signs of human presence in the region, to the establishment of agriculture and other practices and subsistence techniques characteristic of proto-civilizations. In Mesoamerica, the termination of this phase and its transition into the succeeding Archaic period may generally be reckoned at between 10,000 and 8,000 BCE, although this dating is approximate only and different timescales may be used between fields and subregions. Archaic era c. 3500–2000 BCE. During the Archaic era, agriculture was developed in the region and permanent villages were established. Late in this era, use of pottery and loom weaving became common and class divisions began to appear. Many of the basic technologies of Mesoamerica in terms of stone grinding, drilling, pottery, etc. were established during this period. Pre-Classic era, a formative period 1800 BCE to 200 CE. During the Pre-Classic era, or formative period, large-scale ceremonial architecture, writing, cities, and states developed. Many of the distinctive elements of Mesoamerican civilization can be traced back to this period, including the dominance of corn, the building of pyramids, human sacrifice, jaguar worship, the complex calendar, and many of the gods. The Olmec civilization developed and flourished at such sites as Levante and San Lorenzo Tenochtitlan. The Zapotec civilization arose in the valley of Oaxaca, the Teotihuacan civilization arose in the Valley of Mexico, and the Maya civilization began to develop in the Isthmus of Tehuantepec in modern-day Chiapas, later expanding into Guatemala and the Yucatan Peninsula. Classic era 200–1000 CE. The Classic era was dominated by numerous independent city-states in the Maya region and also featured the beginnings of political unity in central Mexico and the Yucatan. Regional differences between cultures grew more manifest. The city-state of Teotihuacan dominated the Valley of Mexico until the early 8th century, but we know little of the political structure of the region because the Teotihuacanos left no written records. The city-state of Monte Alban dominated the Valley of Oaxaca until the late Classic, leaving limited records in the mostly undeciphered script. Highly sophisticated arts such as stucco work, architecture, sculptural reliefs, mural painting, pottery, and lapidary developed and spread during the Classic era. In the Maya region, numerous city-states such as Tikal, Calakmul, Copan, Palenque, Uxmal, Coba, and Caracol reached the zeniths. Each of these polities was generally independent, although they often formed alliances and sometimes became vassal states of each other. The main conflict during this period was between Tikal and Calakmul, who fought a series of wars over the course of more than half a millennium. Each of these states declined during the terminal Classic and were eventually abandoned. In the early 20th century, the term Old Empire was sometimes given to this era of Maya civilization in an analogy to ancient Egypt. The term is now considered inaccurate, and has long been out of use by serious writers on the subject. Post-classic era. In the post-classic era, many of the great nations and cities of the classic era collapsed, although some continued, such as in Oaxaca, Colula, and the Maya of Yucatan, such as at Chichen Itza and Uxmal. This is sometimes seen as a period of increased chaos and warfare. The post-classic is often viewed as a period of cultural decline. However, it was a time of technological advancement in architecture, engineering, and weaponry. Metallurgy came into use for jewelry and some tools, with new alloys and techniques being developed in a few centuries. The post-classic was a period of rapid movement and population growth, especially in central Mexico post-1200, and of experimentation in governance. For instance, in Yucatan, dual rulership apparently replaced the more theocratic governments of classic times, whilst oligarchic councils operated in much of central Mexico. Likewise, it appears that the wealthy Pochteka and military orders became more powerful than was apparently the case in classic times. This afforded some Mesoamericans a degree of social mobility. The Toltec for a time dominated central Mexico in the 11th–13th century, then collapsed. The northern Maya were for a time united under Mayapan, and Oaxaca was briefly united by Mixtec rulers in the 11th–12th centuries. The Aztec Empire arose in the early 15th century and appeared to be on a path to asserting dominance over the Valley of Mexico region not seen since Teotihuacan. Spain was the first European power to contact Mesoamerica, however, and its conquistadors and a large number of native allies conquered the Aztecs. By the 15th century, the Mayan revival in Yucatan and southern Guatemala and the flourishing of Aztec imperialism evidently enabled a renaissance of fine arts and science. Examples include the Pueblan Mexica style in pottery, codex illumination, and goldwork, the flourishing of Nahu poetry, and the botanical institutes established by the Aztec elite. Arguably, the post-classic continued until the conquest of the last independent native state of Mesoamerica, Tayasal, in 1697. Chronology. Cultural horizons of Mesoamerica. Mesoamerican civilization was a complex network of different cultures. As seen in the timeline below, these did not necessarily occur at the same time. The processes that gave rise to each of the cultural systems of Mesoamerica were very complex and not determined solely by the internal dynamics of each society. External as well as endogenous factors influenced the development. Among these factors, for example, were the relations between human groups and between humans and the environment, human migrations, and natural disasters. Historians and archaeologists divide Mesoamerican history into three periods, each of which is described below. It is important to note that the dates mentioned are approximations, and that the transition from one period to another did not occur at the same time nor under the same circumstances in all societies. In fact, some authors have challenged the Eurocentric vision of this chronology, which is very analogous to that of ancient Greece.